My name is Gert Schansker and I work as application scientist for Heinz-Waltz GmbH. I will guide you in the following presentation through the software of the DUAL-PAM-100, which is an instrument for the simultaneous measurement of P700 absorption and fluorescence emission changes. I will discuss a personal selection of topics. If you are interested in all the details, please read the comprehensive manual written by my colleague Erhard Fundel. Waltz built several instruments for the simultaneous measurement of chlorophyll fluorescence and P700 and or P700 plus plasocyanin plus pyridoxine. Of the DUAL-PAM-100 there are two versions, the modular version measuring in absorption mode and the fiber version measuring in reflection mode. Both instruments allow the simultaneous measurement of fluorescence and P700. And the dual class NIR for the simultaneous measurement of fluorescence and plasocyanin plus P700 plus pyridoxine. The software of the dual class NIR is structurally similar to the software of the DUAL-PAM-100. Just to show you which instruments I am referring to, photos of the three instruments, modular and fiber version of DUAL-PAM-100 and dual class NIR, are shown. The user surface of the DUAL-PAM-100 software consists of a set of settings tabs above a central square and a set of application tabs below this central square. As I will try to show, these tabs are placed in a logical order, making the software easy to use. It is important, though, not to lose the overview. I will start my guided tour at the Mode tab. In the Mode tab, the user decides between single and dual channel measurements. If it is important to measure fast kinetics with a time resolution of about 30 microseconds, fluorescence and P700 should be measured separately, and the single channel option should be chosen. If the time resolution is not so important, and a 150 microsecond time resolution is okay, the dual channel option fluo plus P700 can be chosen. The second choice to be made in this tab is between SP analysis and fast acquisition. In the SP analysis mode, standard experiments like quenching analysis and light curves can be made. When the user wants to make a manual experiment, the SP analysis mode will be chosen as well. In the fast acquisition mode, the user works exclusively with script and trigger files, and the experiments are short, not more than a few seconds. Examples of such measurements are the determination of fast induction kinetics, O, I1, I2, P, and the decay kinetics following a singleton overflash. Switching between SP analysis and fast acquisition mode is accompanied by a change in the fluorescence and P700 gain and damping setting. At the bottom of the tab, it is possible to activate flux mode. This represents an alternative method to determine the electron flow. For this method, a redox component, which responds rapidly to changes in the light intensity, is needed. In practice, this method works well for P700. The second tab is the Measuring Light tab. Here, the measuring light intensities for fluorescence and P700 are set. The P700 measuring light is not actinic in the sense that it does not induce the reduction of QA. It may have a slight oxidizing effect, causing some oxidation of plasocyanin. In an experiment, this may be compensated by applying a short multiple turnover or empty pulse of maybe 20 milliseconds, about 30 seconds before the start of the experiment, to return all plasocyanin to the reduced state. Below the P700 measuring light, there is a button with two scales with which the light intensity of the 830 and 875 nanometer wavelengths can be balanced. The balance button on the bottom side of the window has the same function. In the dark acclimated state, all P700 is in the reduced state. Under these defined conditions, it is a good idea to have equal intensities at 830 and 875 nanometers at the detector. That is, after the measuring light has passed through the sample. The balancing was effective when the value below the PM button on the right-hand side of the window is close to 0. With respect to the fluorescence measuring light, there is an important difference between the DUAL-PAM-100 and the dual class NIR. The DUAL-PAM-100 detects the fluorescence at wavelengths longer than 700 nanometer, whereas in the case of the dual class NIR, the fluorescence is measured at wavelengths longer than 780 nanometers. At these longer wavelengths, the contribution of photon 1 fluorescence to F0 may be smaller. For absorption measurements, it is important that the sample covers the whole measured area. In that way, the measuring light cannot reach the detector directly. The next tab is the actinic light tab. Below actinic red light, far red light, and actinic blue light, the width is indicated. In general, the width should be set to manual. That means that the light will remain on until the user or the script turns it off. Only in special cases, it is a good idea to give a defined length to, for example, the actinic red light. A special feature of the DUAL-PAM-100 software is the split between blue light and far red light. In the DUAL-PAM-100, the two cannot be used simultaneously. This formal split is missing in the dual class NIR. There, the user can obtain the same effects writing or modifying scripts. For most photosynthetic organisms, far red is chosen as a light source to oxidize the electron transport chain. Only in the case of cyanobacteria, and possibly red algae, blue light may be chosen instead. The user does not have to use blue light though. The user can also use far red light in the case of cyanobacteria. The software offers the option. The user decides if he or she wants to make use of it. As discussed in the accompanying presentation, the parameter PM is the difference in amplitude between all P700 oxidized and all P700 reduced. This is determined by first giving a far red pulse to oxidize most P700, followed by a saturation pulse to oxidize during the first 20 milliseconds the rest of the P700, followed by reduction of all P700. By choosing Use Blue and checking the Use for PM determination box, it is possible to use blue light during the oxidizing phase of the PM protocol. If the Use for PM determination box remains unchecked, far red light is chosen by default. In the left bottom corner of the actinic light tab, there is a section called Cinemodulation. This box allows the user to define a cinemodulation with a defined period, amplitude and phase for either actinic or far red/blue light. On the right hand side of the slide, an example is given of the effects of a cine oscillation in the actinic light on the measured signals. The experiment was recorded with a dual class NIR. Photosynthesis was induced for approximately 6 minutes, and then the cine oscillation was turned on. The figure shows the effect of the oscillations on the fluorescence plus the cyanin, P700 and phaedoxin signals. As the figure shows, only P700 is very sensitive to the oscillatory light. It is this sensitivity which makes P700 very suitable for the flux measurements mentioned earlier. The next tab is the Slow Kinetics tab. In this tab, the parameters for a quenching experiment are defined. In the acquisition section, the number of points and the acquisition rate are selected. The maximum number of points is 1,024,000. At an acquisition rate of 1 millisecond per point, this equates 1024 seconds. If a rate of 5 milliseconds is chosen, the potential length of the experiment is increased to 5120 seconds. Even if the maximum number of points was selected, it is a good idea to check the unlimited box. This prevents, for example, out-of-range messages in the case of light curves. In the slow induction curve section, the timing of the experiment is defined. The experiment normally starts with a F0, FM and PM determination, and then, sometime later, the actinic light is turned on. This time interval is called delay, S. The default value is 40 seconds, but the user can decide to increase this interval. The next parameter is called SP2 delay, millisecond, and defines how long after the turning on of the actinic light the second saturation pulse is given. Here, this pulse is given after 1 second of actinic light. The parameter clock, S defines the repetition rate of the saturation pulses, in this case 20 seconds, but again, the user can decide to use longer intervals. The AL width then defines the time the actinic light is on. Here, 340 seconds, which means that during this time, 17 plus 1 is 18 pulses are applied. Also, a recovery time is defined. The instrument gradually increases the time between the saturation pulses during this part of the experiment. The recovery time is only measured if the user chooses the option induction plus recovery in the slow kinetics tab. At the bottom of the acquisition section, the available time is indicated. Here, 1024 seconds. And at the bottom of the slow induction curve section, the total time, with and without recovery, is given, 380 and 980 seconds respectively. Both stay within the available 1024 seconds at an acquisition rate of 1 millisecond. In the left corner, in the clock cycles section, a target number is indicated, here 10. In principle, this means that after 10 cycles of the clock parameter, that is 10 saturation pulses during the illumination, the experiment would stop. In general, it is a good idea to inactivate this function by checking the infinite box. If the fast acquisition mode is chosen, the last tab is the fast trigger tab. In the fast trigger folder, several standard trigger files can be found. For example, the trigger file for the measurement of the polyphasic rise, also known as OI1, I2P or OJIP. For the measurements shown here, I use the script file containing this trigger file. In the center of the slide, a screenshot of the trigger protocol is shown. To allow the determination of F0 at high measuring light frequencies, the time interval for this determination is kept very short. On the left side of the slide, it is shown what happens when the polyphasic rise is measured in dual channel mode. The signal looks oscillatory due to the block structure of the measurement. Using a 9-point averaging of the data, these oscillations disappear. But this also negatively affects the time resolution of the measurement during the OI1 rise. The two panels on the right side of the slide show that no oscillations are observed if single channel mode is used. A singleton overflash is applied after 1 millisecond of illumination. The detector is turned off during the flash, and this causes an artifact, a strong downward spike. The next slide shows OI1 I2P measurements made on geranium leaves for both fluorescent and P700, measured at different saturation pulse intensities. The artifact points were removed, and this leads to a small step in the kinetics of the transients. At the highest saturation pulse intensities, the FM value is somewhat lower. This is due to a phenomenon called HIC, high intensity quenching. In the Trick Run tab, the user can create slow trigger files. For this, there are 3 action cells. Below time, millisecond, below action, and below setting. Clicking in the cell below time, millisecond, with the left mouse button, a cursor shows up. This allows the user to change the time. That is the position of the action on the timeline of the experiment. Clicking with the right-hand mouse button on the cell below time, millisecond, a drop-down menu shows up. It allows the user, for example, to add a new line. In the next slide, the other two cells are treated. Double-clicking on the cell below action, an arrow shows up. Clicking on it makes a drop-down menu visible, where the user can choose an action, for example FML-int. The parameter FML-int, measuring light intensity, requires an intensity level. This level can be set by double-clicking on the cell below setting. This activates up and down arrows with which the level can be set. A slow trigger file can also be created in a different way. In the coming 4 slides, this procedure is illustrated. First, an experiment is approximately created manually. The user has to go to the Slow Kinetics tab, choose there the option Manual in the green rectangle, and then start the measurement by clicking the Start-Stop button located directly below. The example experiment is created to show that a far-red induced P700 re-reduction phase is lost once the Kelvin-Benton cycle is activated. The protocol consists of 30 seconds of strong far-red light, followed by 2 minutes of low-intensity actinic light, and finally 60 seconds of strong far-red light. Once the experiment is finished, by clicking the Start-Stop button, the Copy Trick Run from Manual Recording button in the red rectangle becomes active as shown in the screenshot. Clicking this button extracts the trigger information from the experiment and transfers it to the Trigger Run tab, as shown in the next slide. The table on the left side of the slide shows the trigger pattern of the created experiment. Looking at the timeline, it is clear that the timing of the different steps of the experiment can be improved. The table on the left side of the slide shows an edited timeline. Far red on after 3 seconds of darkness and off again 30 seconds later. Then a 100 seconds dark period, after which the actinic light is turned on for 2 minutes. Again 100 seconds darkness, followed by 60 seconds of far red light, and finally 100 seconds of darkness. By clicking in the Trigger Run tab on the diskette symbol, a folder pops up. I saved both the rough and the edited trigger patterns. If the trigger pattern is loaded in the Trigger Run tab, I can return to the Slow Kinetics tab to run the experiment as shown in the next slide. In the Slow Kinetics tab, I first have to change Manual in Trick Run, and then click on the Start-Stop button. The screenshot was made after about a third of the experiment. The next tab is the Saturation Pulse tab. In the Set Pulse tab, the user can define the length and intensity of a saturation pulse. The DUAL-PAM-100 and dual class NIR have strong red LEDs, and it is possible to apply saturation pulses of more than 30,000 micromole photons per square meter per second. For most leaves, 10,000 to 12,000 micromole photons is enough, maybe a bit more for sun leaves, and on the other hand lower values for dilute suspensions of, for example, algae. The tab gives the user the option to set the pulse light intensity for the F0 FM determination separately. To reach the FM in a dark acclimated leaf, relatively low light intensities are sufficient. 3,000 to 5,000 micromole photons per square meter per second is more than enough in that case. Using a lower light intensity will reduce the light stress on the plant. On the other hand, using the same light intensity for all pulses may make the measurements more comparable. The absence or presence of HIC, high intensity quenching, could affect pulses differing in their intensity differently. The user has to decide if he or she wants to make use of this option. The best length of a saturation pulse is plant species dependent. The pulse should be long enough to reach a stable maximum, but if the fluorescence at the end of the pulse starts to decrease again, it means in most cases that non-photochemical quenching is being induced and that the pulse is too long. In many cases, a pulse length of 300 to 500 milliseconds should be sufficient. However, in gymnosperms, green algae and cyanobacteria, a pulse length of about 200 milliseconds may be a better choice. It is important to realize that with respect to a saturation pulses, the acquisition rate is fixed when the SP analysis mode was chosen. That means a length of 1600 milliseconds, of which in most cases only a relatively short part is used for the actual pulse. In fast acquisition mode, the acquisition rate can be modified. If the user chooses 32,000 points at an acquisition rate of 10 microseconds, the measurement will last 320 milliseconds. And in that case, the measurement will continue for only a few milliseconds after the end of a 300 millisecond pulse. Finally, in the bottom left side of the tab, there is a section called P700 SP evaluation. In the DUAL-PAM-100 manual, a figure is shown in which the meaning of these two parameters is illustrated. They play a role in the P700 back extrapolation method to determine the highest, that is most oxidized, P700 value. The next tab is the light curve tab. A light curve consists of a set of light steps of a defined length, which are each time followed by a saturation pulse. If the user wants to record the kinetics of a light curve and not just the derived parameters, he or she has to check the light curve with slow kinetics box. Standard in the light curve tab, the parameters y2, y1, ETR2 and ETR1 are shown as a function of par. By clicking on the Fit button, the ETR2 and ETR1 curves can be fit with either Eilers and Peters, that considers a decline of ETR at higher light intensities, or Platt et al., which assumes a continuous increase of ETR. By clicking on the calculator symbol, a menu pops up showing the different fit parameters. Clicking on the Edit button, the light curve menu pops up. In it, the user can determine for each step the length and also for each step the applied intensity. The user can change the light intensities in ascending or descending order, or first up, then down, or randomly. For a parameter like NPQ, there is a memory effect, which means that a higher light intensity step is likely to affect a subsequently measured lower light intensity step. If the user chooses, for example, light steps of 10 seconds, that is setting 1, the Kelvin-Benson cycle cannot keep up with the rate of change. And also in that case there will be a difference between a sequentially increase or decrease of the light step intensities. This phenomenon is called hysteresis. In the Mini-PAM-2 presentation, the effects of step length and pre-activation of the Kelvin-Benson cycle on the parameter ETR2 are illustrated. A zero step length placed in the timeline of the light curve protocol ends the measurement. It is maybe best to keep the light curve window for the parameters y1, y2, ETR1 and ETR2, and to use the SP analysis window for the other parameters. In the SP analysis window, the parameters are not plotted as a function of par, but as a function of the time of illumination. Parameters can be selected or deselected by clicking next to the parameters listed. If the parameter is selected, a symbol shows up, and if it is deselected, the symbol disappears again. Selecting a parameter means that the associated data are shown in the graph window. In the Report tab, MPQ is given. However, if the user exports the data from the light curve or SP analysis tab as a CSV file, MPQ divided by 4 is exported. MPQ is divided by 4 to keep it inside the 0 to 1 window. In a publication, it is probably better to multiply NPQ divided by 4 values again with 4 to regenerate the parameter NPQ. A tab associated with the light curve is the yield plot tab. In this tab, y1 and y2 are plotted as a function of each other. If at the end of each step the sample has reached the steady state, most of the time a linear correlation is observed between these two parameters. It has to be observed though that a lower y2 means more QA reduced, whereas a lower y1 means more oxidized P700. This tab can be used to illustrate the effects of the correction for the contribution of the photon 1 fluorescence to F0 in the left bottom corner of the window. Erhard Fundel found in different publications that in C3 plants this contribution is about 25 to 30%. Inserting 25% and then clicking Recalc indeed brings the correlation closer to the diagonal. Below, this will be illustrated in a different way. Subtracting the photon 1 fluorescence contribution to F0 decreases F0 and thereby increases FV over FM and FV dash over FM dash, and therefore also ETR2. On the slide, it is shown that a 25% correction brings the ETR2 curve much closer to the ETR1 curve. In the steady state, the electron flow through all PS2 reaction centers and through all PS1 reaction centers should be the same. However, ETR1 and ETR2 will only give similar values if the photon 1 to photon 2 stoichiometry is approximately 1. Parameters that are completely determined by variable fluorescence, like QP and QN, are in principle not affected. The parameter NPQ, which is an FM parameter, is sensitive to photon 1 fluorescence, which the figure confirms, although the kinetics of the light intensity dependence are not affected. In summary, going through the tabs relevant for an experiment is relatively easy to prepare the software. For topics like PM, interpretation of P700 measurements, and some applications, see the accompanying presentation. And with this, I will finish this short presentation on the DUAL-PAM-100 software. Thank you for your attention.